Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out to our training here, which is on tree health monitoring. So we're very excited to talk about this today. I know this is a big topic in a lot of urban tree planting organizations at the moment. So happy to have you guys with us. My name is Alex Binck. I'm the tree inventory program manager at California ReLeaf. And I am also joined by Peter Aldag with PlanIT. PlanIT is a company that created and maintains the TreePlotter software that we use in our inventory program. So I know not most of you guys, I think, are members of the program, but maybe not everyone. So, but although I think looks like we have Tree San Diego and Canopy, so you guys are already using your own subscriptions, I guess. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, can you guys see my screen here?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay,
yes.
Great. And I can't see the faces right now, so yeah. Let's go ahead and dive into it, shall we? We do have ISA credits, CEUs. So if you're an arborist and you're interested in that, definitely make sure you stay till the end. And then we're going to give you a link to a sign-up sheet where you'll put in your information, and then we'll send those off to the ISA so that you can get your credits. That'll be just for this training. You can't get that any other way afterwards. So you do have to be here at the end to receive that. Okay, so let me briefly go over what we're going to cover. We're going to do a quick introduction. We're going to talk about how to design a monitoring program. Then I'm going to pass it off to Peter, who's going to show us, how you can use some of the tools in TreePlotter to collect monitoring data in the field. We're going to do a brief Q&A after that. So this is going to be kind of a longer training than some of the ones we've done. So to try to keep things moving, we are going to ask you guys to stay muted during the main instructional sections, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions at the end. However, I would encourage you to, if you think of a question so that you don't forget it, go ahead and type it into the chat, and that way it'll be there and we can answer it when the time comes. So then that'll be kind of the first half of the training. We'll do probably, 10 minutes or so break, so that we can, re-up on coffee, do whatever else we need to do. And then we're going to dive into the data collection technique. So how to measure trees correctly, how we want that data reported in TreePlotter. Then I'm going to talk about how you can use the data you've collected briefly. And then we'll do a quick wrap up and some more questions at that point on that section. Okay, so to get started, I just want to talk briefly about basically the scope of this training. So again, this is kind of geared towards using TreePlotter, especially our TreePlotter subscription in the tree inventory program to monitor young trees. So it's going to talk about those TreePlotter tools, but also a lot of the kind of protocols for collecting data that we are following, because the goal of our program is to kind of make sure that data collected by one organization can be compared to another organization. So that means that it all needs to be collected to the same standard. So we are generally going to focus on younger trees. Obviously you can do monitoring on older trees, but we're not going to talk too much of that just because the main focus for I think our network is young trees that you guys have planted in fairly recent years. And then we're going to kind of focus on the most common pieces of information that you're going to collect, because there's so much to talk about that you may have a specific program where you want to measure something that's outside of what we talk about. But we can go through that maybe one-on-one if you have questions, like you're like, oh, I really want to measure tree height or something. We can talk about how to do that, but for most groups, they're not going to need that information, so we're not going to cover that in this training. If you do need to, if you have further questions about what we talk about here, or you want to go outside of kind of the basics of what we cover, I do have office hours. Usually try to do those, maybe twice a month or something like that. So if you go to our website, you can sign up for those. And then we also have, there's an urban tree field guide from the US Forest Service, which Megan will put in the chat. And that is basically the foundation of our data protocols here. So definitely recommend checking that out as well if you have further questions. Okay, so just a reminder, again, any data that we're putting into the California ReLeaf TreePlotter system, we want to make sure it's all at the same standard so that, again, we can compare it. And that means also any users that are collecting data for you, they need to have training so that they can meet that standard. So you guys here at the training, you're probably going to be the leaders potentially of other people. So keep in mind that, we are asking you to take responsibility for, the data that they put in there. So think about how you're going to actually train those other users. Maybe you just have them, watch this video if you feel like that's sufficient, but I'm happy to work with you as well if you have questions on how to do that. So some of the fields that we have in here are really specific in that we want the data collected in a particular way, so like DBH or trunk diameter, that's one such field. We do want it measured in a precise way so it's comparable. There are other fields like notes where it's kind of up to you. You can put whatever information you feel is useful there. And so if you do have other data that is a little more shaky, that can be a good place to put it. Okay, so let's talk about how to design a monitoring program. So there's a few questions you should ask yourself before you get started. You don't want to just dive straight into going out in the field. You want to think through, how are you going to do this? What are you trying to achieve? So, what are the key questions that you're trying to answer with this program? I think that would be the very first question I would ask myself if I was starting a monitoring program. So if people want to, they can go ahead and if you already have a question in mind that you're interested in answering, maybe type that into the chat so we can see what you guys are working on. The other question is, what does your capacity look like? Are you a volunteer organization where it's like one or two people are really doing everything, or are you a larger org that is, doing a lot of different stuff at all times? You have a big team that can collect data. Which trees you're going to monitor, and also, what data you're going to collect is going to depend greatly on how much time you have available to collect it. So if you're a smaller org, you might want to be a little bit more focused in terms of what you're doing. Another question is, what's your level of expertise? Do you have like a board certified master arborist that's working with you that can, kind of already knows a lot of this stuff, or are you just going to be leading a bunch of volunteers who basically don't know anything about this and they're going to have to start from the very ground level? That might also change the way you run your monitoring program. If there's certain things that are more, technical to collect, like measuring DBH, it's not super complicated, but it does require some level of knowledge. You could skip that and just record whether the tree is alive or dead, right? That's very simple. And then the final question is, what trees are you actually interested in? Do you want to collect data on all the trees that you've planted? Is it a certain subset? Think that through as well, and think about how many trees you can actually monitor in terms of that capacity as well. So when you're deciding on that topic of which trees to collect, think about what's your overall population of trees, right? So the trees the population when we're talking about a survey or a scientific sample is all of the trees that you want to learn about, right? So that could be all of the trees that you've planted, right? If your question is, I want to know how many of the trees we've planted have survived after 3 years, right? Then you really are wanting to learn about all the trees you've planted. However, if you're doing reporting for a grant or something like that, it might just be, okay, it's these specific trees planted at this specific time in this specific area, right? So in general, there's kind of two approaches to this. If you're wanting to learn about a really big population of trees, you could consider doing like a random sample of the trees. This gets a lot more complicated, so I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you absolutely feel like you can't collect data on, your whole population. But if you're interested in learning about randomization, I can definitely talk you through that process, but we're not going to cover it in this training. The other thing to think about is biased data. you want to make sure that whatever data you collect is accurately representing the pool of trees that you're making assessments on, right? So if that means all the trees you've planted, you wouldn't want to just collect data on trees in one park or something and assume that, you know, the outcome in that one park is the same as all the other parks, right? Because it could be a different condition there. The other thing that can be really complicated is getting access. You know, if you planted all your trees in public property and you can just go look at them anytime, not a problem. But if you're doing any kind of planting on private property, this can be a big challenge, right? Because you may or may not be able to navigate getting permission to return to those trees. And in my personal experience, this can create issues of bias, right? Because, you know, if you imagine that you have like two types of people that you're working with, right? There's one type of person that, you know, reads all your newsletter all the time, is super excited about your program. They love you, they love their tree. And when you email them and say, hey, can I visit the tree and check on it? They say, I'd love that, you know? And then you have another group of people that, you know, they just ignore everything that you send them, or maybe they moved away, or who knows what happened with them, right? And if you assume that those two groups of people, if their trees are doing equally well, you've made a pretty grave scientific mistake, right? Because the trees that you're going to have access to, in general, I'll tell you, are going to be doing better than the ones that you can't access. So you do need to think that through. So make sure that, you know, if you are having trouble like for me, when I was running my monitoring program, I tried to at least get, you know, alive or dead information about every single tree that I set out to monitor. And sometimes that meant like calling people repeatedly and just getting whatever information I could from them. Even if, you know, they're touching about private property or something, you know, you don't need to actually visit, but at least if you can tell, you know, what's the outcome here. So that's kind of the basics of designing a program. Like I said, there's a lot more to think about there. So if you do have questions, I'd be happy to work with you on the particulars of what you're trying to achieve, because there's, you know, there's a lot of common pitfalls, some of which I just outlined, but we might want to have a conversation and just make sure that we fully thought it through. And I would even start like, you know, within your organization, just talk through those questions, because there's a lot of things to think about. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Peter, who's going to show us how we can use TreePlotter to record data.
Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and take over screen share. Awesome. Can everyone see my screen okay? Got a thumbs up.
Perfect. I can see you, yeah.
Cool. So what I'm going to talk about is how to isolate a group of trees to perform monitor on, and then also how to mass update those trees to indicate that you're going to start a monitoring program, or even update any sort of data fields you want, again, at a larger scale, so that we don't have to click on each individual point and fill out each details form separately. And then next, I'm going to talk about how to utilize the inspections functionality within TreePlotter to both update your details form, but also create a history of the change that has happened. So again, in that monitoring sense, if you see an observation, take an action against it to, you know, fix like a broken branch, for instance, you can then have a change log and see those changes over time. So jumping right into it, what we have here is a network organization, and you can see I have about 50 of almost 200 trees just in my maps extent. So that's what this is showing right here. So again, I'm showing 49 trees of the 191 that are in this network organization. And we're not going to run monitoring on all of those trees, and we're not even going to monitor just those 50 trees. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the advanced filter tool. I'm going to access that by pressing this filter icon up here in the top of the legend. And I've already isolated a few fields that I would like to filter on. So starting off, we're going to go to just the project name. So let's say we had a project that we knew we were going to do some monitoring on. I can be done selecting, and then I can apply this filter. So one thing you're going to notice is that the number of trees has been reduced to 26, and I'm seeing all 26 of them in this map extent. So I can zoom in on this group of trees, and I can visualize this group of trees in two separate ways. One is just seeing these points on the map, each one representing a tree. The other option is over here in the data table, I can look at these trees in a tabular form. In this case, I've isolated the tree ID, that project name that we've already filtered on, status. As we can see, none of these trees are currently being monitored. This is what we're going to be updating to indicate that these are being monitored. And then we see a little bit of information that might be relevant to this exercise. So the next thing that we're going to do is filter on open access. So again, like Alex just mentioned, you might have a tree planting event that's going to be a mix of public and private trees, and we need to know what trees that we even have access to. So I'm going to open up this option, select yes, and apply this filter. And now we can see that we've boiled it down to 17 sites. So again, we went from like almost 200 trees to just the 17 sites that we're interested in monitoring. And that was all done through the filter tool. One other thing that I wanted to point out is with this, I'm just kind of filtering on this group of trees based off of these individual fields, these assets. The other option I can do is I can filter on just the map location. So I can use the tree map filter tool right here to isolate a even smaller subset of trees. So I just want to point that out. So let's say you're doing a monitoring project in a park, but you're only going to monitor the trees in one area of a park. You can use that tree map filter tool to just isolate a smaller group. I can clear.
Another thing you can do with
Yep.
this that's really helpful is if you need to break up, if you have a big area that you're covering and you want to break it up into different groups of people where they're going to go, you can draw, an area around kind of their territory so that each group is like covering a similar number of trees.
Yep, exactly. That's a really good point. So yeah, again, it all depends on how you're crafting your monitoring program. And you could use that to even assign trees to different groups like Alex just mentioned. The other option we have here is to utilize the tree ID. So we can filter on either a range of values, or if you had a subset that you wanted to filter on, what I could do is, so I can see I have my tree ID is starting at 297. And then if I use a comma to separate that out, let's say I wanted to do every other tree, 295, right? So we'll just kind of grab a couple of them here. I can filter on an exact range, and I can separate individual tree IDs with a comma to just filter on that group. So now we have this group isolated here. If I didn't want to run that filter, I can simply uncheck this box and then reapply all the other filters that I had running before. So this is going to be that subset of trees that we want to run this monitoring on. So I'm going to reduce the filter, but it is still running in the background. This box up here will be yellow and it says filters applied. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're not seeing the trees that you think you should be seeing, or if these counts seem incorrect, just make sure you don't have a filter running in the background where you accidentally filtered on an additional field that you actually didn't mean to filter on. But now that I have my group of trees isolated, obviously I don't want to have to click on each and every one of these individual trees to indicate that I want to monitor them, nor would I want to go through this list right here and have to click on each one of these cells to update them. So what I can do is I can use this update function right here, which is going to allow me to mass update a field to change the field's value. One thing that's really important here is to double check your numbers. So again, it makes sense. I know I have 17 trees that I wanted to monitor, and this mass updater is connected to the filter tool, and it is also indicating those 17 records. If this number is off or doesn't line up with what you think you should be seeing, again, go back to those filters and make sure everything's lined up, because you can theoretically mass update your data to be incorrect. The next step is going to be adding the field that I want to update. And in this case, all I'm going to do is indicate that we want to monitor these trees. And so I'm going to select monitor and then indicate yes. And then I can press this update button. Again, it'll give you this warning, just making sure you're aware that you're about to mass update these 17 trees. And it'll give you the output of what you're about to mass update it to. So again, it's really important to double check in these steps, because again, if you're dealing with thousands of trees, it can be a kind of a mess to clean up. Don't worry too much. We do pull backups of the data every 24 hours. And so if you do run into any sort of issues, please reach out to either us directly in support or reach out to Alex, and we can work with you on resolving any sort of data issues. But now we've mass update these trees to now indicate that they're all part of this monitoring program. Another thing that I might want to do is save this filter for future use, so that when I log back in later to go, work on this site, I don't have to go through all the steps we just went through. So I can open my filter. Again, I have all of these filters applied right now, so it's important they need to be applied at the time of saving it. But what I can do is save this view filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the name of this project, I'm going to press Save View, and then I'm going to create a new view. I'm going to name it, save it. And now over here in my view filters, this is a new drop-down menu that just opened up. It is indicating that I am involved in this project right here, this monitoring project right here. And so when I log in and log out, or come back to this later on, what I'll be able to do is just simply go to my view filters and then select it from this list, and then it'll automatically bring me to this group of trees. That is the nuts and bolts of how you're going to isolate and then update those trees to indicate they're part of a monitoring program. And next, we're going to look at actually doing the monitoring process. And again, we're going to want to do this through the inspections functionality. So in this case, you are going to have to do this one tree at a time. When I click on a tree, I have an inspect button right here available in this pop-up. I can go directly to this if I know what I want to inspect on. I'm ready to go. Alternatively, I can open up my details form and kind of poke around in this asset, this tree, and kind of see what's going on, get a little bit of information, kind of get my bearings, and then I can inspect from here as well. So the important difference between updating a tree in the details form and using this inspection feature is that it will create a change log over here in this history tab under the sub-tab inspections. So right now there's no inspections on this tree, so no results. Once we start running inspections on it, I'll go back to this tab and show you that you'll have a history of what changes you made to that tree, but it'll also update the details form with that new information. So we are going to inspect on the DBH, or the diameter of the trunk, in inches. One thing that I want to point out is that when I open this up through the inspection, it recognizes what information is already in my details form. So see, we have a 1-inch caliper tree, and let's say it grew just a little bit, so we'll update it in here to 2. We're also going to take a look at the status field. So again, in this case, let's say this one, we'll leave this one alive because it grew a little bit, right? But you could update that status and track if it's missing, if it's standing dead, if it was never planted, right? So all those different factors are going to come in here. So status is going to be an important one to filter on as well. Other factors would be QA needs. So this is going to be a multi-select. I can choose what additional QA needs to be done on this tree. So we'll maybe tag tree health in this case. And then another important one is going to be observations, right? So we're going to monitor this tree for its health and see what's going on with it. And let's say there's a broken branch that needs to be cleaned up. I can indicate it here. And one thing I want to point out again is if I look at the observation tree field here, it's empty right now, but I've checked this box on here. So it recognizes it again, what data is living in the details form. I'm going to very briefly talk about the ability to create a work record from an inspection. So in this case, we indicated that there was a broken limb. And if I did want to create a work record, which is essentially assigning a work task to that tree, I can check this box right here and it'll open up a form that will allow me to indicate that there's work on this tree. We have additional trainings and resources on the work records functionality. So if somebody wanted to take a deep dive into those, I believe it's posted on California ReLeaf's website, and you could always utilize Alex's office hours to kind of get a little bit more in-depth training on work records functionality. So I just wanted to point out that this is available, but I'm going to uncheck this box for now just because this training is going to be focused on the inspections functionality. So now that we've filled out our inspections form with all the information that we want to add to it, I want to note that there are additional fields that are unique to the inspection down here. So all of these fields in green correlate directly to the tree details form. And then down here, these fields are, again, unique to the inspection. And the idea behind it is, let's say you had a notes field that you didn't want to override, because again, we're going to be overriding the existing data in this details form. Or if you had photos that you just wanted to be associated with that inspection, maybe it's not relative to the tree itself in like where it is in the landscape, but you were doing an inspection and found some insects, for instance. You could take a photo really close to those insects and then tie it to the inspection. So again, these non-green fields are going to just be unique to the inspection. When I press submit, it is going to indicate this is the first inspection that has ever happened to this tree. And so there's not a previous inspection to kind of base these changes off of. Typically, people will just leave this last modified date as the date of that first inspection or even the date the tree was added, but you can override it if you wanted to. Also keep in mind that this pop-up will only occur the first time a tree has been inspected, and I'll demo that in a moment here. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm happy with that date. I'm happy with this inspection. And now notice that I didn't press any buttons. The observation broken limb was automatically captured and updated in here. If I go to the tree, I can see my DBH, my trunk diameter was automatically updated to 2. And if I go back to my tree, let's say I went away and revisited it, I go to the details form, history, sub-tab inspections, and now I can see that, remember before this said no data, there's nothing in here. I can see I logged in as user 1, did an inspection on this date, and then you can see all the changes that have happened to this tree. So that user expertise did not change. I did not make any sort of updates to this, so that information carried through. But for instance, the QA needs indicated going from none to tree health. The DBH went from 1 to 2, so on and so forth. So you can see any fields that you have available in your inspection will come in through the inspection, but now I have a change log. On the flip side, if I were to go into this tree and just update this to 3, close this out and reopen it, that change will not be captured. So I go to this details form, I see that it saved it as 3, but I go into history, inspections, and no evidence of that change. So this is why it's really important to utilize the inspections functionality, because I can retrieve this information later on and see exactly what changes happened, who made those changes, when those changes happened. And I can also export this information and run reports on it. So that's another really helpful piece of information, is that I can run reports on my inspections and I can see what changes have happened over time.
Yeah, this can be really useful if you wanted to do what's called a cohort study, which is basically comparing, maybe that's the wrong term, but if you wanted to compare trees that are of the same age, right? Like if you wanted to look at how your program was doing in the past and how it's doing now, you wouldn't want to compare, trees that you planted 10 years ago that are 10 years old to trees that are 1 year old, right? That wouldn't make sense because they're going to be different because of their age. So if you had done an inspection though, 9 years ago when the tree was 1 year old and you wanted to compare, what your 1 year old trees look like now, you can go back to those old inspections and compare. So that's a really great feature of having that information recorded.
Absolutely. So at this point, I think we can open up to questions.
And feel free to either raise your hand with the Zoom or unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
No.
ahead.
Can it?
We initially heard you, but now you might have cut out.
And you might want to try to connect your audio via phone, and there should be there it goes. You came back.
Maybe in the meantime, looks like David has a question.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, since we're in a position here in Roseville of just getting started with inventorying quite a number of trees, would you recommend that we do an inspection along with that initial tree inventory? So first time we're putting a tree into the system, we grab some of the basic information, should we also then go into the inspection screen and start logging that we've captured some information about the health of the tree?
You don't need to for that first round, because like in this case, this up here a little bit. In this case, this bottom row right here, so this inspection ID 32 is actually like what that initial base information was. So it considers the first inspection. So again, this bottom row as the base information on that tree that has never been inspected, which is why when I run that first inspection, it gives me that pop-up window asking what date I want to use. And so I could either use like an alternative date of, when that tree is maybe inventoried versus, if it was like uploaded, for instance. So again, the initial upload data will just get pulled in. So all of these fields down here, like this intermediate being filled in, 1 being filled in, 54 being filled in, was like tree added, information added, and then that inspection kind of captured it. So again, the inspection that I just ran is this one right here. And then this right here is just what was in that details form originally. Moving forward, it is going to base everything off of the most recent inspection. So the next row above this, number 34, would be pulling information off of this last row, not what that initial information was.
And
Did that?
Yes, that helps. And I guess just to go a little further with my example, I'm logging that tree for the first time, and I notice that it has a broken limb. I'm still able to capture that in the initial inventorying of that tree without having to go into the inspection function?
Correct. So just to kind of run through your scenario, we can add a tree, dud tree in the middle of the road. And just to kind of go into what you talked about, let's stick with that broken limb, right? And then, there's all these, I always forget you have required fields. So we'll just go right to the inspection from here. The inspection functionality will recognize, so see, it recognized what is in that details form. So when I initially indicated broken limb, it'll recognize that in the first round of inspections.
Great, thank you.
So be stuck in there otherwise.
So yeah, just to add to that, basically, you could run an inspection. The inspection, so yeah, you don't need to. If and probably it'll be easier not to, but the only disadvantage, right, is that you have to navigate that tree details form, which is a little bit more complicated, because the inspection form is kind of optimized for like things you might collect in the field, right? Versus the tree details form has everything that you might want to record about a tree, which is quite a lot. So that's why it has all those different tabs and things. So you do have to be able to know where the field you're looking for is. So that broken limbs thing, that's going to be under care and health, right? So if you haven't already like explored those different tabs and looked at all the different fields that are in there, I would recommend that. And then we also have a list of the fields in our user's guide, which is linked on our webpage as well. So definitely check that out. And that has even more detail on like, what do these different fields mean? How do you use them? All that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Got it.
Show you
Thank you.
real quick the kind of the importance of using the inspections functionality is, notice in this tree, I had changed that DBH to 3 and then ran another inspection. And in the inspection, it recognized that 3 was in the details form because I changed it in the details form, but now there's no record of that 3. So you kind of like lost that data. But when I ran this second inspection, it didn't give me that pop-up asking about this being the first inspection. And so as you all just witnessed, I did 2 inspections. So lines 33 and 34 are inspections, and line 32 is just that baseline of that tree. So this is that detail, the information that was already in there. And everything that was not updated got carried across. So those QA needs did not get closed out during the inspection. So those are going to persist until they get closed out. So that would be a potential way to track like tree maintenance or things that you observe during it. So for instance, with this broken limb, let's say that persisted through this inspection. Now I do a third inspection and say this broken limb has been dealt with. It's not an issue anymore. I submit this, and now I'm going to have evidence of there being a broken limb at one point in time that was then resolved.
Okay, so it looks like Ebony couldn't get her audio to work, but she put her question in the chat, which was, how do we download all the details we inspected for? So I'm assuming she's talking about the inspection data there that you're looking at.
Yeah, so in the inspection, we're going to see all of these fields up here. And these are preloaded. I'm logged in as an admin right now, so you might see this add and remove field option. You will not see that with your login. I think unless maybe the tree tech level does, but I think most of the users will not. Okay, so no one's gonna have that. So this add remove field is how a admin would be able to modify this form. So if there was something that you wanted to inspect on that's not a part of this form, you can reach out to Alex and have a discussion on whether or not that would be beneficial to everyone using this program. Otherwise, these fields were all sort of specially chosen based off of what would meet, the widest audience for the needs of the application. And within here, all of this is actually preloaded. So when I add a tree, again, in this case, this tree was added, planted alive, DBH was 1. You don't have to do anything to download that information. And this information's kind of preloaded in the inspection because it recognizes what was in that details form. So there's the kind of process would be add a tree, fill in your details form, and then that's the kind of, I guess, download part. You're downloading it right then and there, and then the inspection will recognize what information's in there.
Hi, I was the one who just asked the question.
Yeah.
So Canopy's TreePlotter is a little bit interesting in the sense that it is. I don't think we're using it through ReLeaf, but we are using it for monitoring purposes. So this page here, when I try to download, so what we use the data for, we do compile it into reports. So it's helpful to be able to view all of them in a CSV, then into an Excel sheet, to compile that data into graphic form. But so hopefully, the hope is that we'd be able to download a set of points, a set of tree points, and be able to download the inspection that we made for all of them into one document.
I see. That makes sense.
I know we would do that in the past before we got the inspection tool. But then our issue was we didn't have the inspection tool, so we couldn't compare it to past data. This is our first year using the inspect tool, and I still haven't quite figured out how to download all the data, not just from one tree, but from the entire selection of trees. And in my case, I will need to download hundreds of points worth of data. And we're talking including DSH, tree health or health ratings, and other customized functionalities that we included, that we test for, or that we survey for.
So I believe what you're referring to will apply to this training, but I also think that you have your own TreePlotter application and probably have some unique questions or fields that you would want to review. I can send you an email and we can book a separate training to kind of get into that. But just because your question is actually relevant to the California ReLeaf group in this training, I do want to point out where you would download inspection data. So it's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So within the data table, you'll see that you have the trees as a option. So this is the data, like we mentioned earlier. We can visualize the points on the map, or we can have the data in this tabular format over here. And it is kind of hidden, but right here, there's a sub button within the tree drop down, I guess. for the inspections of those trees. So right now I'm seeing 17 trees. Under more, I can export, download the data set either as a CSV or a shapefile. Now, if I wanted to have both my tree data and my inspections data, which is again the changes that we've made to those trees, the trees being the most up-to-date via an inspection, asset details, fields, so on and so forth, I have to click this inspections button. And now notice that I only have these 4 records. And that's because out of the 17 trees, we've only inspected 1 tree, and we inspected that tree 3 times, and that 4th one being that original baseline. So now what we have here is the baseline of the tree, and then the 3 inspections, the most recent inspection, that 4th inspection, being equivalent to what we would see on this row right here of that actual tree, right? And so under the kind of sub button, I guess, of inspections, I have more, and then I can export from here. So you can export your inspections from here as well. This will be affected by all filters. So if you ran a filter on one tree or a group of trees, a subset of trees, you will be able to, again, download whatever information that you want from within here. One thing to keep in mind is that you have a couple of IDs in here. One is the inspection ID. This is a unique ID for the inspection that just indicates this is a novel inspection. And then the other one is the inventory ID. In this case, this is indicating that this tree 3325 was inspected 4 times. So again, 4 unique inspection IDs all done on the same tree. So that's how you would kind of link those up later on if you were looking at that data set. And then the one other thing I wanted to point out quickly is in the hub under reports, tree reports. And again, this is another kind of hidden thing because you're thinking tree reports. There is an inspection report option within here. Run that. And again, this will be a, instead of just that CSV or that shapefile, it's a little bit more of an interactive format. So I can see the tree ID and then all the different inspections if I had photos, and then I can print this, tells me what filters I have running, so on and so forth. So again, your 2 options are just exporting the data from the data table or running a chart report to see the inspections. So again, I think that is a good question for the broader audience, but if you did want to talk about your own subscription, we can set some time aside to do that.
Yeah, and then I just want
Thank
to
you.
add, oh, sorry. I just wanted to add on to that because I think most people here were not at the data management training that we did a few weeks ago. But that data table that Peter was showing you from which you would export the inspections, that is going to be based on the filters that you have running currently. So if you wanted to export all of your inspections across all trees, you want to make sure to clear out all your filters. Or if you had a specific population that you wanted to look at, you would create a filter to narrow down just to those trees, right? The other thing is, I believe when you export from the data table, it only exports those fields that exist as columns in that table. So right now, for example, it's only showing us certain fields in that data table. And if you go to that views button that Peter was just clicking on, you can select which fields you actually want to export. If you want to export all of them, there's a checkbox at the top that you can click to make sure they're all selected. Which is what I usually do. But if you did only care about certain fields, you could select those as well. So for us, and I think for Canopy as well, you guys have a lot of different fields. So, it is going to create a much bigger spreadsheet, right? But that's okay. You can always, draw out the data that you need on your, on your own computer as well, if you want to do it that way. So, but yeah, just make sure to be aware of those 2 things so that you don't try to extract all your data and end up with only part of it. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. My question was very well answered.
Okay, so then next we had a question from Dale about the user guide and is it updated? The answer is yes. I know it was not updated for a bit there because I was busy with other things and I had added some things to TreePlotter and I didn't have them all in there yet, but it is now up to date on all those additions. It's still a little bit bare bones, so I'm kind of, I don't have a set update schedule, but when I make changes, I will try to reflect them in there. And I'm kind of adding more and more stuff to it over time, when I can find the time, basically. So yeah, sorry, there's no specific schedule, but I would assume generally, the vast majority of the time, unless I've just recently made a change, it should be up to date. Any other questions right now? Okay, well, in that case, if there's nothing else, I think we are going to take a short break here, maybe about 10 minutes. And we'll say goodbye to Peter. Thank you so much, Peter, for helping us with the TreePlotter stuff. And then I'm going to go through, when we come back, I'm going to go through like how to measure, what kind of standard procedures we want to follow when you're out in the field collecting data, so that when you put it into TreePlotter, it's all accurate and standardized, like I mentioned.
Awesome. I appreciate your time.